started, and people who are to join late, they may also enjoy that afterwards and in the meanwhile also. So the
Okay.
lecture should not be late.
Okay.
So please,
Sure.
I welcome Azeem Ali and learned audience, and I ask Azeem Ali sir to come up with his ideas about what he thinks about the culture till first millennium AD, how India and Asia, how they were related, and particularly Southeast Asia, as he has chosen the topic to speak. So I welcome sir you. Please start.
Okay. As everyone just mute their microphones as well. As well. Just kindly request that. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about India and Southeast Asia from the first millennium AD. And it has been described as so great, actually, that the historian George Coates actually called them the Hindu states. And they readily accepted Indian concepts of royalty, Sanskrit, and Hinduism. And the spread of Indian culture came early in the Christian era, mainly through trade rather than conquest. And recent DNA studies have now shown that this was accompanied with migration from India to Southeast Asia. And Indian influence persists in the language of Southeast Asia, such as Malay and Thai. And here is a map, which I think is important to start with, just so that everybody can have a conception of India and its location in relation to Southeast Asia, because I'll be talking about a lot of these kingdoms. So obviously Myanmar, Cambodia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia. So I'm going to be talking a lot about this region, and of course including Thailand. So the earliest beginnings of this era can be traced back to the mid-first millennium BC, when Austronesian sailors from Southeast Asia first established trade contact with South India. The Ramayana actually mentioned Java and maybe perhaps even Sumatra, while the Jatakas mentioned the tales of seamen traveling to India back and forth. And the Nidesa Pali Kanaka test, which dates to the early first millennium AD, describes Sanskritized places names which may be linked to Southeast Asia. And on the Malay Peninsula, the Chinese mention small or petty Indian states existing from the 2nd century AD onwards. However, the earliest inscriptions in the area date to the 4th century AD. In present-day Indonesia, inscriptions of Mulvarman have been found from the early 5th century AD in Kutai and Borneo. The inscriptions of Purnavarman have been found in the mid-5th century AD in Java. And images of the Buddha have been found in central Vietnam in the 6th century AD. And this attests to early Indian interactions with Southeast Asia. And here is a really great kind of map here with all the different depictions of the Buddha. And you can really see, how far it really spread, and also the variation in age of all the depictions of the Buddha. Some going back, very much at the beginning of the first millennium AD. You can see here from Vietnam. These are predominantly from Vietnam and Cambodia. You can see how strongly influenced it was by Indian art. This is very much imitating Gupta art, which was in the preceding centuries in India. And the reason for the expansions, so Southeast Asia, well, what's interesting is that actually in odds with traditionally there was a taboo called the Kalapani, which is the black waters taboo, which has existed since antiquity. And it's traditionally thought that crossing the black water or Kalapani and contact with the Malecha would actually lead to spiritual defilement and impurity. So one would actually lose their ritual purity. But however, it was the resources, the abundant resources and trade with Seleucids and later the Roman Empire to the west who fueled this expansion. And the name Tokola, or market of cardamom, and Kapura Dvipa, the island of Camphor, and Narikale Vapira attest to Indian interest in Southeast Asia. And now I'm going to look at the first of these kingdoms, the kingdom of Funan, which is the oldest of the Indianized kingdoms of Southeast Asia. This was known, and Funan was a Chinese name that was given to it, and it was founded in 68 AD. which is almost 2,000 years ago, approximately around the time of the Scythians and early Kushans in India. The kings of Funan stylized themselves as Parvataba Bhupala, or Sela Raja, or King of the Mountain in Sanskrit. Funan encompassed southern Vietnam, central Mekong, much of the Menam Valley, and the Malay Peninsula. Its capital was Vyadapura, or City of Hunters in Sanskrit. It was located in Prey Veng province in Cambodia. The first king of Funan was a Brahmin named Kondinya, who most probably, I mean, it's my research showed he may have come from India, but it's highly likely that he was actually somebody who had migrated from India. And according to a Sanskrit inscription in Champa, which has been found, Kondinya received a javelin from the Brahmin Asvatthamaman, son of Drona. He threw it to mark the location of future capital, and then married a daughter of the king of the Nagas named Soma. And from this, the royal line originated based on Chinese records such as the history of the Southern Sea, the great kings of Yunnan, attacked and subjugated, and neighboring kingdoms, making them vassals. And these
Unmute. Tanvi, please unmute.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah. Mute. Okay. Yeah. Can someone mute, please?
Someone means Tanvi joined late. Just I would request her to please unmute. Please mute. Sorry. Please mute your mic so that the voice should not resonate. Thank you very much. Please, Azeem Ali sir, please start.
Mute. Sorry.
Please start your lecture.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. And the sorry, just so I think I'm gonna have to mute. Okay. Anyway. Yes. So based on so sorry. Where's what? And so he King Kondinya threw this javelin to mark location of future capital, and then married the daughter of the king of the Nagas, named Soma. And from this, the royal line originated. Based on Chinese records such as the history of the Southern Qi, the great kings of Funan attacked them and subjugated neighboring kingdoms, making them vassals. And large ships were built, and more than 10 kingdoms were attacked, thereby creating a naval empire. And among these vassal states was Langasuka on the Perak River in the Malay Peninsula. Another kingdom was Tambalingam on the Malay Peninsula, and its port was known to the Koli as the Koli to the Roman geographer Ptolemy. It is from Koli that Funan sent an embassy to India by the 3rd century AD, and Funan was ruled by King Srimara, who is known to have used the Sanskrit as the official language of his court. It is believed that he died during an expedition to present Lower Myanmar, or Burma, as is known, or the Malay Peninsula, at a place known either as Suvarna Bhumi, land of gold, or Suvarna Kutia, or wall of gold. And here's one of the ruins of Go Tap Moi in Dong Tap, Vietnam. During the reign of Fan Chan, an embassy was sent to India. The envoy visited the kingdom of the Murunda in present-day Odisha, India, and they were given a tour of the kingdom by the king, who gifted horses to them. The visit was reciprocated by the Murunda embassy to the court of Fan Sun, the usurper of Fan Chan. According to the Chinese ambassador Kang Tai, we have an account of the kingdom of Funan in the late 2nd, 3rd century AD, around 200 to 300 AD. There are wall villages, places, palaces, and dwellings. Their nature is simple, and they are not at all inclined towards thievery. They devote themselves to culture. They sow 1 year and harvest for 3. Moreover, they like to engrave ornaments and to chisel. Many of their eating utensils are silver. Taxes are paid in gold, silver, pearls, and perfumes. There are books and depositories or archives. It's also said that their written script was of Indian origin. Sorry. Wait, just a second. Sorry. Can you mute? Can you mute? Can you mute, please? Sorry, it's very difficult for me. Yeah, can you mute? Sorry. Can you stop the recording, please? Sorry. Yeah. Sorry about that. So I'll just start again. Yeah. Can you resume recording again, please? Sorry. In 357, so I'm just going to continue now. 357 AD. Sorry about that. In 357 AD, Funan fell under the domination of an Indian king who used the title of Chandan, which was a title also used by the Kushans and Indo-Scythians. The same year had seen the Gupta Empire conquer much of North India under its ruler Samudragupta. For the next century, princes, Brahmins, and scholars migrated to Funan and introduced Sanskrit epigraphy, or inscriptions. One of the oldest inscriptions of Funan is that of Vo Khan. According to the Chinese history of the Liang, one of the kings of Funan was Kondinya, a Brahmin from India. He changed the laws of the kingdom to conform with that of India. And one of his successors was Sri Indravarman, and he was recorded as sending embassies to the Sung dynasty with a petition and products of his kingdom. In 480 AD, a successor of Sri Indravarman named Jayavarman became king of Funan and sent the Indian monk Nagasena to southern China with gifts for the key emperor Wu in exchange for an alliance against Champa. And here's an inscription of a mid-4th century AD Funan stele with a Sanskrit inscription. I couldn't actually find a better picture of it, but I'll send the slides later, so hopefully you can make out the script. And unfortunately, I myself can't read it, but it's quite clear that it is kind of very much influenced by India. But obviously, these big steles are very much reminiscent of what they have in China. So it's interesting to see that kind of composite culture. And unfortunately, these efforts to actually ally with the Chinese, the Emperor Wu in China, didn't actually come to anything. So Jayavarman sent all these gifts, but Emperor Wu didn't actually send his army against Champa to help him. But the Chinese did treat Funan with great respect, as evident from this imperial order from 503 AD. The king of Funan, Kondinya, Kondinya Jayavarman, lives at the limits of the ocean. From generation to generation, he and his people have governed the distant lands of the south. Their sincerity manifests itself afar. Through their many interpreters, they offer presents in homage. It is fitting to reciprocate and show them favor and accord them a glorious title. This is possible with the title of General of the Pacified South, King of Funan. Jayavarman died in 514 AD after being assassinated by his brother Rudravarman. Jayavarman's son retired to a Vaishnavite sanctuary in Tapmoy and was described as the moon of the Kondinya line. Rudravarman was the last king of Funan, and a Sanskrit inscription from Bhatti confirms that Buddhism was flourishing. He sent the Indian monk Paramartha, or Gunaratna, to teach Buddhism in China. However, the circumstances of Rudravarman's succession to the throne would come back to haunt him, as his legitimacy had always been in question. Attacks led by Bhavavarman of Chenla and his cousin Chitrasena would lead to the end of the kingdom of Funan in the 6th century AD. In the 6th century, the Chenla kingdom in Cambodia carried out a campaign and subjugated Funan. Chenla traces its origins to the union of the hermit Kambu Siavamuva, ancestors of the Kambodjas, with Mera, who was given to him as a wife by Lord Shiva. The couple was known as Kambu Mera and produced a line of kings, including Shrutavarman and his son Shretavarman. The latter gave his name to the city of Shretapura. The king at the time of the conquest of Funan was Bhavavarman. His wife was Kambujara Lakshmi, fortunate kings of the Kambojas. And now here, just to show Chenla now in relation in Southeast Asia. You can see roughly where it is located in relation to China and the very edge of India here, and Myanmar, and Thailand, and Vietnam, and China. Bhavavarman was also related to the kings of Funan, as he was the Sarvabhauma, grandson of the universal monarch, i.e. the king of Funan. He resigned in Bhavapura by the late Tonle Sap in northwest Cambodia. Thus, Chenla preserved the lineage of Funan, and there was considerable continuity between both kingdoms. And the reason of antagonism between both kingdoms may have been the Buddhism of Rudravarman and the Shivaism of Bhavavarman. Bhavavarman gifted his cousin Chitrasena lands in the Namsak Valley. Chitrasena came to the throne in 600 AD and took the name of Mahendravarman. Mahendravarman has left inscriptions in Surin telling of the establishment of lingas of Lord Shiva and the erections of the images of Nandi. His successor was Isnavarman, who completed the conquest of Funan. Isanavarman's capital was Isanapura, which is thought to be in Sambo Prey Kuk in Cambodia. And here is a Buddha from Meto in Vietnam, which is roughly from this period. And you can see kind of elements. It's becoming more local and indigenous, but you can still see remnants of the Indian influence there. This is kept in the Guimet Museum in Paris. And Isanavarman was succeeded by Bhavavarman II in 639 AD, and he left an inscription in Takeo, Cambodia. He built structures in Vyadapura, Ba Phanom, and at the old sanctuary of Linga Parvata, or Wat Phu. During this period, the Shivaite sect of the Pasupatas and the Vaishnavite sect of the Pancharatas coexisted. Court poets drew upon the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and the Puranas for their poetry. And this king, Bhavavarman II, was succeeded by Jayavarman I, who reigned until 690 AD, and he held the posthumous title of King who went to Shivapura. And unfortunately, he left no heir and was succeeded by Queen Jayadevi in 681 AD, and her reign faced considerable instability. And after 706 AD, when King Jayavarman I had died without a male heir, this led to anarchy in Cambodia. And in 713 AD, Queen Jayadevi ruled over Chenla, and she had made donation to a sanctuary of Shiva, Lord Shiva's, at Tripurantaka. And this sanctuary had been founded by Princess Sobhajaya, daughter of Jayavarman I, and she had married the daughter of the Shivaite Brahmin Sakrasvarman, a migrant from India. Sorry, the queen had married the Shivaite Brahmin Sakrasvarman, who was a migrant from India. In 716 AD, a prince of Aninditapura named Pushkara or Pushkarasha became king in Sambupura, and the ruins are still extant in Sambo in the Mekong Valley in Cambodia. And here's some of the ruins there, and you can see the very much the influence of kind of Indian architecture. It's very, very apparent. And you can see the images of the gods here. So very much influenced by India. And unfortunately, it's believed that it was this king that they just described where the breakup of Chenla kind of started, and this is corroborated by the Chinese. That there were two Chenlas. So there was Lan Chenla, which sent an embassy to China in 717 AD and aided the Vietnamese revolt against China in 722 AD, and Water Chenla, which was itself divided into several principalities, and these comprised Aninditapura in the south, which was ruled by Baladitya during this period, and Baladityapura was the capital of Water Chenla. And Baladitya, who had founded the capital, claimed descent from the Brahmin Kondinya and the Nagi Soma, who was later claimed as an ancestor of the kings of Angkor, and his successors included Nirpaditya. Another king of the land Chenla was King Jayasimha Varman, whose inscription may date to the late 8th century AD. And inscriptions in Sambupura or Sambo from 770 AD and 781 AD just records a king of water Chenla named Jayavarman. And now we're going to move now away from Chenla to the kingdom of Champa, which comprises parts of Cambodia and of Vietnam. The kingdom of Champa was one of the longest living Indianized kingdoms of Southeast Asia, which lasted for more than 1,000 years, from the 2nd century AD to 19th century AD. According to Chinese sources, it was founded in 192 AD, which was contemporary with the Kushan Empire in India and its emperor Vasudeva I. The Champa claimed descent from the Bhargava dynasty of the Mahabharata. Their main rivals were the Sinicized Vietnamese, which was a struggle which was the last centuries and would eventually lead to their subjugation by the Vietnamese more than a millennium and a half later. And here is a Buddha which was found in Vietnam, and you can clearly see the kind of Gupta influence. It's very, very apparent that there's very strong kind of Gupta influence here on a statue in Vietnam, and it could have been made by Indian craftsmen or someone with knowledge of Indian sculpture, because very, very apparent it's a kind of very Indian style sculpture of the Buddha, found in 1911 in Quang Nam in Cham in Vietnam. And one of the kings of the Champa during the kind of 4th century, 5th century AD was King Bhadravarman, who's been identified from Sanskrit inscriptions found in Quang Nam and in Phu Yen. He established a sanctuary dedicated to Lord Shiva, Bhadrasvara, which was destroyed by fire, unfortunately, in the mid-7th century AD. An inscription from his reign attests to the dominance of worship of the composite deity, Lord Shiva as well as homage being paid to the other deities of the Trimurti, namely Lord Vishnu and Lord Rama. And after the death of Bhadravarman, his son or grandson invaded Jinnan, which had been under Chinese influence, but he was defeated in 413 AD. But he didn't return from another such expedition north of Jinan. And sadly, unfortunately, he was either killed or presumed missing, as he was never found. And his son and successor abdicated in favor of a nephew, Manoratha Varman, and went to India. He said to have visited the Ganga River and described it with great joy. His successors endured defeats at the hands of the Chinese, and his later successors, Devanika, who sent embassies to China and left a Sanskrit inscription at Bazakt near Wat Phu. In 529 AD, a new dynasty began to reign, which would last for just over a century. The son of a Brahmin and grandson of Manoratha Varman came to the throne. His name was Rudravarman I. He traced his ancestry to a king who went on a pilgrimage to the shore of the Ganga River in India. Rudravarman carried out a raid to the north, but was defeated by Pham Tu, a general of Libon, who had revolted against the Chinese, and was king of Tonking. The sanctuary of Bhadresvara was destroyed in a fire during his reign. After the death of Rudravarman, he was succeeded by his son Sambhuvarman, and Sambhuvarman sought to throw out the vassals to China. When the Sui dynasty came to power in 595 AD, they initially recognized Champa as a vassal, but then the Sui dynasty ordered their general Louis Phang to conquer Champa after having conquered Tonkin in Vietnam. Sambhuvarman resisted in vain, but the Chinese armies triumphed over Champa and plundered its capital, Tri Q. After the Chinese withdrawal, Sambhuvarman retook control of his kingdom and begged for forgiveness from the Chinese emperor. Sambhuvarman sent embassies to the succeeding Tan dynasty in 618 AD. And in 629 AD, Sambhuvarman rebuilt the temple of Bhadrasvara, which was renamed as Sambhu Bhadrasvara, which was a composite of Sambhuvarman and Bhadravarman. Sambhuvarman was succeeded by his son Kanda Patdharma, whose reign was peaceful, and he sent tribute to the Tang dynasty. This policy of sending tribute to China was continued by his son Prabhasadharma, who reigned until 645 AD, and there followed a period where power passed out of his family line. A descendant of Prasadadharma would later ascend the throne in 653 AD. His name was Prakasadharma, who also took the title of Vikrantavama. He was a patron of literature, praising Lord Vishnu, but he also recognized the greater power of China, so he had to send tribute to the Tang dynasty. And a later kingdom of the Champa was Rudravarman II, who continued the tradition of sending embassies to China. And during this period, the political center of gravity in Champa began to move from Panduranga to Kotara. And I couldn't actually find many artifacts from this period, but this is one of the artifacts I could find. These are kind of 2 crowns from this time. So you can see it's quite beautiful craftsmanship. So this is one of the, and I think that's a chakra, looks like a chakra, and a kind of lotus leaf here. So you can kind of see elements of Indian influence in the crowns that the Champa kings wore. At Katara reigned the kings of the kings Priti Vindravaman and its successor Sayavaman. And it was during the latter reign that the Javanese raided his kingdom and destroyed the sanctuary of Ponagar, which was built by the legendary king Vichitra Sagara. And Satyavaman built a new sanctuary to the gods in 784 AD, and who was succeeded by his brother Indravaman, who also had to fight off Javanese raids from Indonesia, which destroyed the sanctuary of Badra Dipata Sisvara. Which is interesting that you had Hindu kings kind of fighting each other and raiding each other's temples. It's quite interesting kind of to compare with India, that this in India used to also happen. So it's interesting that in Southeast Asia they did exactly the same thing as what used to happen in India. So I find this quite interesting. They literally were very much imitating the kind of styles of kingship and military conquest, which is very, very much favored by in India as well. And thanks to Chinese records, we know that this king in particular, Indravaman, was still king in 801 AD, and he was succeeded by Harivarman I, and he launched a series of campaigns into China, and initially was successful. And then he was succeeded by Vikranthavarman III, who made endowments of Ponagar and in Nahatrang and at Ponagar in Mongduk in 854 AD. So it shows that they were very keen to gain the blessings of the gods. Perhaps also they felt they needed it when the fight, carrying out these campaigns against much bigger powers such as China. And they must have showed gratitude to the gods for obviously their successes as well initially. And now I'm going to look at a succeeding dynasty, also in Champa. So in 875 AD, a new dynasty was founded in Indrapura in the modern province of Quang Nam in Vietnam. And the founder of the dynasty was Indravarman II, whose personal name was Lakshmindra Bhumisvara Gramasvin. And he had a peaceful reign and continued the same practice of sending embassies to China in 877 AD. And his successor, Simavarman I, took power between 898 to 903 AD. And it was during his reign that a relative of Queen Tribhuvana Devi, Poklung Pili Rajatvara, went on a pilgrimage, or a Siddhayatra, to Java, which was also known as Yavadvipapura in Sanskrit. Unfortunately, there's a paucity of sources. I couldn't really find many regarding Sivavarman's successors, but during the reign of one of their successors, Indravarman III, there are more records that survive. So he actually built a magnificent statue of Bhagavati, which I don't believe actually survives, unfortunately, but it was consecrated in 918 AD at Ponagar in Nahatrang. And he had to repel a Khmer invasion around 950 AD. And unfortunately, this must have been very magnificent gold statue of Bhagavati, was among the loot taken by the Khmer. It was probably melted down as loot. And his successor, Jaya Indravarman I, restored the sanctuary after it had been destroyed. But instead, he built a stone image of Bhagavati instead of the obviously looted golden statue, in case there was another invasion again. And here is one of the temples in Ponagar, in Nahatrang in Vietnam. And you can see it's actually dedicated to Lord Ganesh. So again, it's very, very apparent the Indian influence, again, as I described. And here's a depiction of Durga above the entrance to the temple as well. Still showing quite strong Indian influence. Although it's beginning to show elements of more kind of local art styles as it becomes kind of indigenized local culture. But still, it's quite interesting to see that. And in 972 AD, Jaya Indravarman I was succeeded by Paramisvaravarman, whose reign would be troubled with misfortunes. In 978 AD, he organized a naval expedition in an attempt to restore the exiled Ngo dynasty to the throne in Hoa Lu in Dai Co Viet in Vietnam. But a storm destroyed most of the fleet, except the boat of Jaya Indravarman I. In 980 AD, Le Huan came to the throne in Dai Co Viet and founded the Lei dynasty. And he sent an embassy to Champa, but his envoy was arrested by Paramasvaravarman. And this was a very foolish thing to do on his part. on the latter's part to arrest an ambassador or envoy, and this provoked a war, apology for the typo, and Loy Huan launched an invasion which destroyed Indrapura and killed King Parameshwaravarman in 982 AD. And as one can expect, there was a period of turmoil until King Harivarman II was able to reinstate himself as a ruler in Indrapura, and his successor, whose name who is called Yangpu Vijayasri. His name actually isn't known completely, but we have fragments of his name that's survived from inscriptions. But he abandoned the capital, obviously due to the fact it had been destroyed by invasions, and obviously saw that it could be attacked again, and he moved to the capital of city of Vijaya in Binh Dinh in present-day Vietnam. But Indian influence, fortunately, would soon decline as Champa became a tributary state of China, and this would last until its demise as a kingdom in 1832 AD, which is quite recent when one thinks about it. It's just under 200 years old, 200 years ago. Now we're going to look briefly at the Indianized kingdoms in Myanmar or Burma. So despite its proximity to India, surprisingly, Myanmar was influenced by Indian culture relatively late, from about 500 AD. But ancient signs in the Irrawaddy basin in the ancient Burmese kingdom of Pew have yielded fragments of Pali texts. And these documents confirm the existence of a kingdom which was later known as Shikshetra, with a dynasty of kings with Sanskrit names. In addition to this, there was also colonies of Indians, which is quite interesting, in lower Myanmar. And these Indians came from present-day Odisha. And the principal colony of the people of this community of people from Odisha was a place called Sudhamavati, also known as Sudhamapura, at the mouth of the Setong River in Myanmar. And 7th century Buddhist sites at Phra Pathom and Phong Tuk form part of the Mon kingdom of Davaravati, which actually has gates in Sanskrit. And here's actually one of the Buddhist stupas in Myanmar, and you can see it kind of has elements of kind of Gupta influence. It may remind some of the audience of the stupa in near to at Sarnath. I mean, I kind of slightly reminded of the stupa at Sarnath, and obviously some of our audience here who stay in Varanasi, who live in Varanasi, would may recognize that. So there's kind of elements of that influence there.
At Sarnath.
Yes. So yeah, Sarnath. Yes, yeah, exactly. No, it kind of reminds me of Sarnath. Yeah. Yeah. And there are also records of kings ruling in the area in the late 7th century and early 8th century AD. And they all had Sanskrit names, which I find interesting, such as Surya Vikram, Hari Vikram, and Siha Vikram. And in 791 AD, the Pure Kingdom established relations with China after the latter's conquest of Nanchao in kind of southwest China. And during the first half of 9th century AD, Nanchao ruled over Upper Myanmar, or Burma. And the depopulation of Prom during this period benefited the famous Burmese kingdom of Pagan at the confluence of the Irrawaddy and the Chindwin River, which also lay en route to Assam. And it was in Pagan where the Pews came in contact with the Mon, who had introduced an Indic script and the religions of India. And now we're going to look onto the Indianized kingdoms in the Malaysian peninsula. So in the 4th century AD, inscriptions of Buddhist verses were inscribed on a stone near Penang and also at Bukit Meriam at Kedah. A bronze statue of the Buddha has also been found in the same region, dating to the 5th to 9th century AD. And the Sanskrit text from the 5th century AD has also been found in Seberang Perai in Penang, Malaysia. It describes a successful voyage by the master of the junk or boat, Mahanavika, Buddha Gupta of the Red Earth land, Ratamritaka. And Rakta Rimtika is thought to refer to Kelantan in Malaysia. And here is a statue of Lord Ganesh found in the Bujang Valley in Kedah in Malaysia. It's very interesting that this is almost purely Indian in style. I mean, 100% Indian in style, this depiction of Lord Ganesh. And it's instantly recognizable to our to all our audience. And now I'm going to look also at the kingdom of Borneo, Indianized kingdom in Borneo in Indonesia. And 7 inscriptions have actually been found from the 5th century AD in Borneo. And these date to the reign of Mulavarman, grandson of Kundunga, who is possibly of Tamil origin, and the son of Aspavarman, who was referred to as Vamsakatri. or founder of the dynasties. And these inscriptions are linked with a sanctuary named Vaprakasavera, which may have been dedicated to Lord Shiva or Agastya. Here is sadly a lost Buddha that was found in Kota Bangun in Borneo, Indonesia, and it shows a very apparent Gupta style, especially the folds of his robe. Very much apparent, very much influenced by India again. But this was sadly destroyed in a fire in 1931 in Paris during the Paris World Exhibition, and it's made out of bronze. And in nearby Sumatra in Indonesia, an Indianized style Buddha was also found near Palembang in Sumatra and was likely imported from Bangka Island nearby. One of the kings of Sumatra was named Sriwijaya, who likely ruled southern Sumatra and sent an embassy to China in 434 AD, and this is recorded in Sung Dynasty chronicles. And between 454 AD and 464 AD, another king of Sumatra named Sri Varanarendra sent the Hindu named Rudra on the embassy to China, and this was followed up in 519 AD when the king Vijayavarman sent an embassy to China. And this is a Buddha that was found in Sumatra, now Indonesia, and it was made of granite. And again, you can see the Indian influence, and it's made in Amaravati style. It's made between 9th and 10th century AD. So it's very interesting to see again kind of influence there. Now we're going to look at Java, which is one of the very well-known Indianized kingdom. So Java, as I described earlier in the talk, Java is mentioned in the Ramayana as Yavadvipa, which is where Sugriva was dispatched from an army to search for the goddess Sita and for Lord Ram. And Sanskrit inscriptions of King Purnavarman, who ruled the land of Taruma, were found in the western part of Java. And the inscriptions date to around 450 AD, so the mid-5th century AD, and they describe Purnavarman's father and his grandfather observing Brahmin rites and how he built irrigation works in his kingdom. The kingdom of Taruma lasted into the 7th century, as embassies were sent to Tang Dynasty China between 668 AD and 669 AD. And in the 7th century AD, there was an archaeological inscription at Tukmas dating to this period, which is thought to belong to another kingdom in Java known as Ho Ling. And here is the inscriptions that I've described in that's at Tukmas in Java, Indonesia. And you can see the script is very much reminiscent of the kind of script that I found in India, and you can see the clear iconography very much influenced by India. Perhaps some members of our audience will be able to better explain the symbolism, but I can see clearly the chakra here as well, and these are various. Looks like a trishul here, and lotuses as well. And Ho Ling, as is known, was a Chinese name given to the Indianized kingdom and was a center of Buddhism in Java. And it's believed that the Buddhist monk Janta Bhadra originated in this kingdom. And it was under the direction of the Chinese program Hui Ning translated Sanskrit texts of the Theravada into Chinese between 664 AD and 665 AD. The next Sanskrit inscription for Java was in 732 AD at the Shivayat Sanctuary in Changal, Ukir, to the southeast of Borobudur in Java. And it was commissioned by the king Sanjaya, son of the sister of Sana. The inscription tells of the erection of a linga on the island of Java, rich in grain and gold mines, in the country of Kunjara Kunja on the Malay Peninsula. Sanjaya is later credited with the conquest in Bali, Sumatra, and Cambodia after China, and he was the prince of Mataram, which is the southern part of central Java, and the first in line of his dynasty. He was succeeded by Panangkaran, who reigned under the suzerainty of the Selendra dynasty. And we can look at the Selendra dynasty of Java. And Selendra, as some of the audience may know, means king of the mountain, and is believed to be equivalent of Lord Shiva Girisa, and perhaps represented an Indian adaptation of Indonesian beliefs. And Girisa may have involved the Linga Girisa, which was worshipped by the ancient kings of Funan. The Selendra dynasty had its capital in Varanara, which was known as Varnagara, when it was the capital of Funan. It is believed to have been founded by King Bujayotunga Deva. In 760 AD, an inscription in Dinaya, Java, describes the construction of a sanctuary of Agastya by the son of the king Devasimha, named Gajayana, who reigned over Kanjurahan. He was a devotee of Lord Shiva and a protector of the royal linga named Putikesavara. And here is a depiction of the Sailendra king queen. Apologies for the typo, but here's a depiction of the monarchs. Very much Indian in style, again, with their jewelry and crowns. Very much reminiscent of statues that survived from India. So again, showing Indian influence here. In 767 AD, Tonkin in Vietnam was invaded by the Sailendras, but they were driven back. And one of the succeeding kings of the dynasty came to power in 782 AD. His name was Sangra Madananjaya, who was a patron of the teacher from the kingdom of Goda in Bengal, named Kumaragosha, who consecrated an image in Kelorak of a Mansuri statue, which was a composite of the Buddhist Triratna and the Hindu Trimurti. The later successors don't find much mention in historical record on 824 AD when the king of Samaratunga was king, and he was one of the Sailendra sovereigns of the Sanjaya dynasty. His successor was Pikatan, who reigned from 842 AD and was also known as Kumbayoni and Jatinkarat. He married the princess Pramudhavadani, a daughter of Sailendra Samaratatunga, or Samaragara Vira, who was married to Princess Tara, or Srivijaya. And Pikatan waged war against his brother-in-law Balaputra, the younger son of Samaratunga. And Balaputra was the first Sailendra monarch of Srivijaya, and he had a monastery built in the London, Bihar, which is quite interesting. So it showed the kind of continued influence of India and the kind of cultural memory of India, which still persisted. And in 860 AD, the king Devapala of the Pala dynasty in India also offered many villages as well to the Sailendra dynasty. And now we're going to look onto the Javanese kingdom of Mataram. By the late 9th century AD, the Sailendras had declined. It was up by 900 AD that the name Mataram first appears, also known as Matataram. It was used by the king Balitung of Java. It was under Balitung's later successor that the Javanese Ramayan, so their version of the Ramayan, was composed in the reign of King Sunduk. And one of his later successors was Makuta Vamsavadan, who bore a daughter who would in turn later marry a prince of Bali. In 190 AD, Dharma Vamsa Tugu Anta Vikrama came to power, and it was during this reign that the Virata Parva was composed. And Dharma Vamsa also waged war against Srivijaya and exchanged ambassadors with China, as was the tradition in Southeast Asia. And his is the kingdom of Mataram. So this is in relation to Indonesia. So you can see Java here, Mataram here. And Bali, one of the most famous places in Indonesia for its Indian influence, and still a community of Hindus that still live there and practice their worship. And I'm going to briefly mention Bali, as it's quite a broad topic. So during the same period, the island of Bali also came under the influence of Java. It was directly from India and it's very well known. And perhaps some of our audience have traveled to Bali on holiday, as it's quite a popular holiday destination for its rich kind of Indianized culture and Hindu traditions that have been preserved there. And this goes back to this period. And what we know about Bali was that the first dated documents that we have appear just before the accession of King Sunduk. And this inscription came from Ugrasen, who roughly between 915 to 939 AD. And he actually reveals an independent Indo-Balinese society with its own dialect. And both Buddhism and Shivaism were both practiced in Bali at this time. And here's the inscription at Ugrasena. You can see the very much Indian influence with the kind of lotuses on top. So it's very interesting to see again. And it's very well known, the kind of Indian influence in Bali, because perhaps one of the most well-known places of Indian influence in Southeast Asia. Even to the lay person or traveler to the region will notice that immediately. And all their kings had the suffix Varmadeva. And it's quite interesting that, again, shows the Indian influence. And the marriage of King Dhammadoyana Vamadeva to the daughter of Makuta Vamsavadana led to the growth of Hinduism in Bali as well as Javanese culture. And we're going to look at the kingdom of Angkor. This is one of the most famous kingdoms of Cambodia. So Angkor had also been under the suzerainty of the Selendras, but was freed and liberated by King Jayavarman II, and he claimed descent from a royal dynasty. He claimed descent from the pre-Angkorian Angkorian dynasty of Cambodia, and Jayavarman II came from Java to reign in the city of Indrapura, and has returned from exile after having fled a succession struggle in Cambodia. He was perhaps motivated by the weakening of the Selendras from the 9th century AD. And it was at Indrapura that Jayavarman II appointed a Brahmin scholar, Siva Kevalaya, as his royal chaplain, and became the chief priest or Purohita of the cult of Devaraja, or the God King. Jayavarman II would gift the village of Kuti, apologies for the pronunciation, and the estate north of Tonle apologies for the word, to Siva Kevalaya as a reward for his services. Later, he moved his capital to Hariharalaya, where Siva Kevalaya was also settled by villagers and his populace and subjects. And this site now corresponds to a group of ruins called the Ruloyos groups near Siem Reap. And here's one of the temples, and you can see very grand temples that exist in Cambodia. And again, showing the clear Indian influence. It's very, very apparent that one can easily see straight away the influence from India, again, as is apparent. And later, King Jayavarman founded the city of Ameranderapura, and Siva Kevalaya followed him there as well. And the king then went to reign in Mahendara Parvata, or Phnom Kulen, and again he was followed by Siva Kevalaya. And it was at this capital that a Brahmin named Hira Andyadama came from Janapada to perform a ritual to ensure the kingdom would no longer be dependent on Java. And this ritual was based on the Sanskrit texts, the Vinasika, the Nayotara, and the Samoha, and the Siracheda. And the kingdom was known as the country of the Kambojas at this time. And a linga of Lord Shiva was placed in the pyramid in the center of the royal city, which symbolized it being the axis of the world. King Jayavarman II had now proclaimed himself independent and now sought to strengthen his power to defend himself against the Chams who attacked early on in his reign. The frequent change of capitals may have been due to military campaigns, and one of these such campaigns led by an officer named Prithvi Narendra, who conquered Malyang. Jayavarman II would die at his capital Hariharalaya at 850 AD, and he was succeeded by his son Jayavardhana, a great elephant hunter, who reigned from 850 to 857 AD as Jayavarman III. And in 877 AD, Indravarman succeeded Jayavarman III, and his spiritual successor was a Brahmin named Shiva Soma, a relative of Jayavarman II and a disciple of the Hindu philosopher Sankaracharya. He built the Indra-Tataka, a great artificial lake which is now in Lole, Prasat Bakong in Cambodia, and dedicated true brick towers at Prayako to his parents, who were depicted as incarnation of Lord Shiva and Devi. And here's a temple conquest. Apologies for watermarks, but this is the only image I could find when I was doing my research. You can see kind of, again, the Indian influence here on these temples in Prayako in Cambodia. In 881 AD, Indravarman built a great stone monument for the royal linga Indrasvara, which linked Isvara, Lord Shiva, with that of Indravarman. His authorities stretched from Chaudak to Ubon in Cambodia. He also built the Vimana to Shiva in the old sanctuary of Phnom Penh. And Sivasoma wrote of his rule. His rule was like a crown of jasmine on lofty heads of the kings of China, Champa, and Java. This may be, this is probably an exaggeration, probably for the typo, but it testifies to the diplomatic reach of his kingdom. Indravarman was succeeded by his son Yasvovahana, whose mother, Indra Devi, was a royal lineage from Funan. His teacher was a Brahmin, Vamashiva, whose family had served Jayavarman II and was dedicated to the worship of the Deva Raja, and was a disciple of Shiva Soma, again illustrating the thoroughly Indian influence in the kingdom. He in turn was succeeded by Yasovarman I, who built 100 ashrams, monasteries throughout his kingdom. Each of these had a Rajakuti, or royal pavilion, which was reserved for kings during their royal visits. And inscriptions written in Sanskrit, often in pre-Nagari script, which was introduced to Java a century before. And Yasovarman also moved his capital to the new city of Yasodharapura, where he erected a sacred linga. He also built a series of monasteries named the Brahminsarama for the Shivaites and the Vaishnavite Vishnavasrama. And Yasodharapura was to remain the capital until the 15th century AD. Yasovarman's inscriptions covered an area from Chantaburi on the Gulf of Thailand and Thailand to Ha Tien on the Mekong Delta in present-day Vietnam. So quite an extensive region. And the also raids were conducted over the Chams, or in present-day Indonesia. Yasovarman died around 980 and received the posthumous title Parama Shivaloka. He was succeeded by his son Harshavarman I, who founded the temple mountain Bakse, Chamkrong in Phnom Penh. He reigned until 122 AD when he died and was given the posthumous title of Rudraloka. He was succeeded by his son Isnavarman, who was in turn overthrown by his uncle Jayavarman III, who killed the former in 120 AD. And Jayavarman IV built a palace, his palace in Kokhe, and erected a royal linga of Tribuna Vasnevara, which with inscription stating Kamrateng Jagata Raja, which means the god who is royalty. And Jayavarman IV was to reign until 941 AD, where he was succeeded by his son Harshavarman II, but he only reigned briefly, succeeded by a nephew of Yasovarman named Rajendra Varman. Rajendra Varman established himself as Yasodhapura and was described as the following, again in showing the clear Indian influence from in this kingdom, just as Kusa, son of Ram and Sita, had done for Ayodhya. He restored the sacred city of Yasodharapura. So again, showing that clear allusion to India is very apparent. And here's one of the monuments that survive, which is dedicated to Lord Shiva at Tribhuvaneshwara in Angkor. And Rajendra Varman's construction project was sponsored by officials of high-ranking Brahmins, and among the most prominent Brahmins was Shivacharya, who had been a Hota or royal chaplain since the reign of Isnavarman II. And Rajendra Varman was active militarily and campaigned against Champa and looted the gold statue from the temple of Ponagar at Nahatrang, which I described. Rajendra Varman died in 960 AD and was succeeded by Jayavarman V, and he married off his sister Indra Lakshmi to the Indian Brahmin Diva Karabata, who had been born in India, so a likely Indian migrant who'd immigrated to his kingdom to make his home, an immigrant from there. And again, two foreign Brahmins are also mentioned, referred to as Pradesh in the sources, and they're described as Indians who came and bought land and built Shivaid sanctuaries. So you actually have evidence of Indian communities as well. It's quite interesting. And Jayavarman I died. Jayavarman died in, around just after 1000 AD and was given the posthumous title of Parama Viraloka, and succeeded by his nephew Udayaditya Varman I. And we're going to look briefly at the kingdom of Srivijaya. And Srivijaya was mentioned in Chinese sources by the pilgrim I Ching when he made a pilgrimage from China to India in 671 AD. And he stopped in Srivijaya at a place called Fo Shin, which is a Buddhist center of study. And they studied all subjects, such as they did in Madhya Desa, or India, it was known. And their rules and ceremonies were identical to that of India. And he went on to study at the University of Nalanda in Bihar. And on his way back to China, he again stopped in Fosi between 685 and 689 AD, where he copied and translated Sanskrit Buddhist texts into Chinese. And this is the Srivijaya Empire, as it became known. And you can see its broad reach from Java right up the Malay Peninsula, with campaigns against Vietnam and Cambodia and Myanmar. And during his last journey, I Ching reported that Molo Yu, which he had visited in 771 AD, was now part of Shili Foshi or Srivijaya. There's an inscription at Kedukan Bucket dating to 23rd of April 682 AD, which describes how a king began an expedition or Siddhayatra by boat. This king campaigned with an army via land and sea, and he was victorious and brought power and wealth to Srivijaya. It's believed this king who founded Srivijaya was named Jayanasa. And Jayanasa is believed to have launched expeditions in Java, possibly conquering the kingdom of Taruma, which is no longer mentioned of 669 AD, and delivered a pranidhana, a prayer on the occasion of the founding of a public park. And it's believed that his prayers were influenced by tantric beliefs, as well as Mahayana Buddhist tradition, particularly the Sarvastivada. Between 689 and 692 AD, Jayanasa conquered the kingdom of Malayu in the region of Jambi, and then he went on to send embassies to China, as was customary for kings of this period. And his successors continued this tradition of sending embassies to China, such as Sri Indravarman, and then under his successors, there was attempts to dominate the Straits of Malacca, which is still a strategic choke point between India and China even today, in the region. And in those days, it was important for trade, as it is today. And by late 8th century AD, the king Dhammasetu established a foothold Ligo on the Malay Peninsula, and he built a sanctuary dedicated to the Buddha and to the Bodhisattvas, Padmapani and Vajrapani. And Dhammasetu was succeeded by Samaratunga, who reigned from 790 to 835 AD. 790 AD to 835 AD, and he focused on consolidating his rule in Java. He built Borobudur in Java, Indonesia, which is the largest Buddhist temple in the world, even to this day, and a massive stone mandala was built. And here's the Borobudur Buddhist temple in Java, Indonesia, which still survives intact today. In 905 AD, a Chinese embassy reported how all trade between India and China passed through Srivijaya, and contact with India continued, as it was reported in 983 AD, how priests were sent to India to retrieve sacred texts. And on his return, he met an Indian named Vimalasri. In 995 AD, the Arab geographer Masudi would speak of Srivijaya being ruled by a powerful Maharaja who had a massive population, was a strong army and navy, and was also reputed to produce clove and cardamoms and sandalwood. So a very rich and abundant, very rich kingdom with abundant resources. And on that note, I finished there. It's very comprehensive. So thank you very much for listening in. And I look forward to your feedback. And apologies for my pronunciation of the titles, because they're very, very long composite Sanskrit titles. So I wasn't very familiar, but perhaps our audience can assist me on perhaps breaking some of those titles down and explaining what they might mean to me, as I wasn't familiar with such long titles. So thank you very much.
Yes, it was really a very energizing and engrossing and involving lecture. And I had written a paper about 10 years back about the rise of nationalism in Southeast Asia. And when I was covering that, then I had to visit, means intellectually, the places which are called Southeast Asia. And particularly, I would just refer that you anyhow skipped that, Philippines.
Yes, yeah, because
so
it
would have become very larger. So in Philippines, I found that the dictator of Philippines, Marcos. Marcos was dictator, and then anyhow he was trying to rename the name of his country, Philippines, as Mahalingam, because he said that our ancestors they worshipped Mahalingam, the Shiva, and there were Sanskrit inscriptions on copper inscriptions found there. So that would also add to your story, and which is very interesting, that how the idea of worshipping Lord Shiva, and again how the idea of worshipping Lord Vishnu, and even simultaneously or prior to that, or I don't know, one should have a chronology, that how Buddhism was just getting extensive acceptance in these areas, and how these three type of ideas,
and the gods that we all know, like Lord Shiva, and people
and like Lord Ganesh, and the goddess, even Durga goddess. So, and perhaps I think you could have included, or maybe it had become very large, Thailand, because Thailand has been the king is still, the Thai king still claims to have a descendants from Lord Ram, and there the priests are from India, and they are a particular Brahmins from India who are of Sanatani, we call Sanatani Brahmins.
Yes.
So the whole country is Buddhist, but the king is a Sanatani Hindu in Thailand. So the whole area from Cambodia, and you have very well described about the experiences in Vietnam, and how the Chinese were trying to just establish their sway over, and how these areas were in a sense, bound to send their emissaries to China, and in China they were recorded. So that proved to be something like an evidence that how from very ancient period this area was something like, if I may be allowed to say in such a way, Indianized, having Indian influence. So you very well and in a very exhaustive manner described everything, and really we are very grateful to you.
Thank
And
you.
now I request the audience, honorable audience, to come up with any query, any question, any observation. So although we have less number of persons, because I don't know how to explain this, but yes, of course, but your lecture is so powerful and very, I should say, very effective. And these days people are talking about, in the intellectual world, I'm in Delhi these days, I find people talking about how the heritage diplomacy can be developed. Heritage diplomacy, they say, because of this very heritage, common heritage of this area. So I invite the audience, honorable audience, to come up with some ideas. Please, if someone has to say something, please come and say.
Also, I just want to add as well about this is that it's quite remarkable that what I find interesting is the way the kings ruled, they very much imitated what was current in India. So like a king in India would be expected to to be patron of temples, to erect lingas, and even to wage war against other kings. So they did exactly the same things what was current in India at the time. They literally copied. Like they looked at India and thought, this is how to rule. Like they didn't think of any other way. They saw India as the model to follow, because India was so respected to them. And it's interesting that you had Brahmins coming in as well, which is
You
very
have very
interesting.
well touched upon certain things which are these days one of the great teachers in India these days called Swami Ramanandacharya or Jagat Guru Ramanandacharya. You can listen, he speaks in Hindi, but the way he described Sri Lanka as constituted of the whole area till Australia, he says. But you also mentioned that at some places the Ramayana was written in a local way. So it seems that the whole area was having the influence of Ramayana and Mahabharata. So Mahabharata, Ramayana, and of course the stories which were of of a little smaller nature, but those stories which were prevalent in India, they found expression there. So someone would have gone there, the merchants or the Brahmins or those who were the religious preachers, they would have spread all these things.
And
so,
what I would add as well is there was a paper published about I think it was last year actually, and it actually found that it was not just a cultural interaction. So you actually had they actually found they tested the DNA of about 119 individuals in Southeast Asia, and they actually found they had Indian ancestry. So they'd come during the period so it didn't come during the ancient migrations out of Africa, but rather it came during the historical period that I just described. So there's actually genetic evidence of these individuals coming to India and settling down. And it's quite remarkable that even today, there's still, there's still Indian. It's not just a cultural thing, but it's also genetics. There's actually penetrate like even like so these Indians actually local. They take local wives and settle down. So it's quite remarkable that it's not just culture, but even they would actually move there and marry locally.
I was in Malaysia. There is a Penang Island, Penang Island in Malaysia, and there I found people were using almost 70% of the words having Sanskrit origin, Arabic and Sanskrit. So, and they were calling themselves Dharti Putra. Dharti Putra is a Sanskrit word which means son of the soil. They describe themselves Dharti Putra. So I found that how Sanskrit words, they penetrated into the thinking process of this whole world. And it continues without any I should say attempt or any negative attempt to rule out. Sometimes in certain cultures, sometimes it happens that some words should be taken, some words should not. But there, it's very popular and very much there. The Indian words, particularly Sanskrit words. So, thank you very much. And there are persons who are again requested, gentle scholars, to come up with some ideas or questions even. Sir, if someone can ask some question, yes, please.
Sir, I am S.K. Tripathi. Namaste. Azeem Sahab, aapko bhi namaste. What I observed from the studies on Southeast Asia is that the heritage part will never be completed, because we are yet to embark upon the subject of the study of effect of Younger Dryas comet impact event, which happened 10,800 years BCE. There is no study on this. There is no serious study. It requires marine archaeology. It requires serious study of Purans, legends and myths of India. See what happened after that impact event. Somehow the ice melted and much of the Sunda land, as we recognize, as we say today, it got submerged. So I would say that some thousands, hundreds of thousands acres of land was submerged. So all the civilization which was coastal, which was based by India, and India was connected to this Bali, Cambodia, Champa, and just before the New Zealand part. All these were connected through land routes also. That is why there is so much of Indian culture there. This could never be studied because it is below water, below sea water, at least 450 feet below the sea water. This is one thing. Second thing is that you talked about this blood analysis. I read a study some 20 years back. Some scientists carried out the study of migration of people to South America. He found usually people claim that migration happened through Bering Strait and North America and then South America, but the study of sickle-shaped anemia cells, these cells occur because of a blood disorder, and this is inherited. So study of these cells, on the basis of study of these cells, he claimed that much of the South American native population came through Pacific from Southeast Asia. So you can say that culture too had migrated there. I remember a professor from Assam University. He was a very humble man. Around 30 years ago, he met me in World Book Fair. We discussed something. He said that much of the South American culture is borrowed from Bharatiya culture, Indian culture. So he was trying to sell me few of his monographs, I remember, in the past. But when later on I read some of them, I found that if you study the Puranic text and legends and mythology of different parts of world, it is actually as if the history has happened like a template. Once you get your template right, the places and names, they just fit in. Maybe they are different, but they will fit in. For example, do you know that Inca god Viracocha, Egyptian god Osiris, the Indian, the Yug Purush Krishna and Karn, they have a common thread linking to them. And this is a reed basket. All of them were, they had to pass through a water body being carried on a reed basket or a boat of reeds. So what I say, that after that Younger Dryas event, 10,800 years BCE, the whole civilization has got into an array. We had to start afresh. The humanity had to start afresh, and pieces and fragments of our racial memories from here and there, they have evolved separately, and that is why we have got so much profusion of tongues, events, myths and all these things. But the Indian heritage, I think it would never be fully estimated unless we happen to go below the seawater and somehow we develop the technique to study that underwater remains. That is all I had to say, sir.
Thank you. I just want to add to that that actually I'll send pictures, but I've seen artifacts from the Indus Valley civilization where they're quite strange artifacts. But I have pictures of them. They're found in kind of a couple of cultures called the Kuli and Nindawari cultures, and what you actually see are images of snakes, like snakes, because snakes, and also images of perhaps like an early form of Shiva. So again, some traditions could go back to the kind of early, could be pre-Indus Valley cults or cultures that were incorporated into the civilization. Because now there's more and more evidence now emerging that these, like for example, the Indus Valley civilization was composed of different, like there were perhaps 3 or 4 different languages, and because such a big area, there may have been regional variations in that area. So I'll send pictures in the group, in the WhatsApp group, and Professor Pandey can forward it to you. But there's some artifacts I've had in the past where basically you see evidence of this. It's quite clear, and these have been authenticated. These are clear. These are artifacts from that area, kind of showing kind of snakes and also what looks like perhaps a proto kind of Shiva deity. So again, perhaps a local deity that was kind of incorporated into the Vedic, developed in the Vedic pantheon. So it's quite interesting to see that. That's all I can really comment about that. I'm not really knowledgeable about those kind of migration, but I can say is that it's quite plausible to say that these early, like the Nagas, I think they're called the Nagas, who is like this river cult. I think Naga was a goddess. And that cult could very well have come from kind of ancient, perhaps hunter-gatherer or worship, or even there was some reverence for this, for snakes and for the rivers that they found when they came to India. So it's quite possible that was encompassed into, and contributed to development of kind of Indian civilization. But I'm talking about very, very early aspects. But that's kind of shown in archaeology. So I'll send pictures of that as well in the group. But that's what I can say. And also one thing I apologize for my pronunciation of those the long titles, because they were very long. So again, I couldn't break. I mean, I could see like the long title or the king. So apologies for that as well.
It was written so one can understand. It was written there.
Yeah.
So when you pronounce, one can understand as to what you are saying.
Yeah, but it was very long, so that's why I just struggled, because it's such a long name with all the different titles, which you don't really see that today on that level. So in India, wow, like saying all their deeds and everything. So, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Sir Sisir Kumar Tripathi, sir. You have raised very good question, and you have drawn our attention to a very pertinent thing. And in our group of our heritage management, we have some very great scholars who are experts in marine archaeology, like one Dr. Tripathi, Alok Tripathi, who is now the Director General of, perhaps Director General of Archaeological Survey of India, or something, some position he is having. I had asked him also to come to join and enlighten us, but maybe he was busy. So he is expert of marine archaeology. So I think your lecture would be there recorded on YouTube, and I think people would be listening to it and then coming with queries. So thank you very much, and thank you all our learned audience. And again, thanks for coming and joining the lecture and making it a very lively lecture. Thanks, Azeem Ali Saab. You have done a marvelous, a very giant work you have done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Namaste, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.